Ladies and gentlemen, I give you this story from militarytimes.com. Lawmakers move to automate selective service registration for all men. I hope Gen Z is listening to this one and Gen Alpha. And I hope people who have kids who are Gen Alpha are listening to this one. Now, to be fair, if you're a dude, you got to sign up for the draft either way. There hasn't been one in 50 years, so most people aren't worried about it. But I'm pretty sure if there's a World War III coming and the U.S. thinks it may be the case, yeah, they're going to draft all of you. Now, I'm fortunate enough that I'm old. I am 38. And so I don't got to worry about it. When you're between like 18 and 26, you're just like, oh, I hope a war doesn't break out where they're going to make me fight it. And I don't got to go fight for these crackpots. But Gen Alpha and Gen Z will have to.
What is the cutoff for?
Well, they
and how are we defining men in the modern vernacular?
So it'll go forever, right? If
it's needed, it's just
right. Like Ukraine's drafting women now and the elderly. That's what Ukraine is pulling women and the elderly to the front lines, and they don't give them. There's no training. They grab a guy off the street. There's videos of them they'll grab a guy off the street and be like, "You're going to war," and then people freak out like, "What's happening?" They put him in a uniform, hand him a gun, and say, "Go," and then they're just cannon fodder. But they don't care. The U.S. certainly doesn't care. NATO doesn't care. So here's the story. A new plan from House lawmakers would automatically register men for a potential military draft when they hit 18, avoiding potential legal consequences connected to failing to file the paperwork at a proper time. Language included in the House Armed Service Committee's draft of the annual defense authorization bill would mandate the automatic registration of all males between 18 and 26 living in America in the selective service system, the federal database used for a military draft in the case of a national emergency. It hasn't been used for that purpose in 52 years, but men who fail to register can face a host of legal consequences. Now, I wonder what would be happening right now where you have a Democrat, Chrissy Houlihan, sponsoring the automatic registration language, calling it both a money-saving and common-sense reform. Why? I tell you this. I can assure you right now, the majority of young men will never agree to fight in a nation where women do not have to, but are granted equal say in government, politics, and favored in courts. There is a huge issue right now with the rise of the likes of Andrew Tate and Pearl Davis, and now you got Homath, and these channels exist for a reason. Young men are not happy with the disproportionate, the second-class citizen system that as related to things like selective service. You go to an 18-year-old guy and say, you will be forced to fight and die for a country because a female politician who does not have to do it mandated you do so. Now, you go back in time and a guy says, I am going to go fight and die, and you are expected to do the same. And a lot of guys were like, it's our duty. We all do it. Now you have a system where you have a bunch of elite multimillionaire women like Nancy Pelosi and other Democrats who would vote in favor of this. Not to mention older guys who don't have to fight, telling young men they have to go fight and die. One of the big reasons why the draft is not popular in the first place is because you have elite older men forcing young people to go fight and die for them and their wars, and they don't have to. I say we take it all the way back to the 1900s when they tried passing this bill. I think it was an amendment that said if you vote in favor of war, you have to go fight for it. They said, we'll put an amendment saying we vote on whether to declare war directly, and then if you vote yes, you're conscripted on the spot. It's going to be interesting to see what happens right now with the current state of, how young men are viewing the world and the rise of these angry young men who are pissed off about this system.
Are politicians exempt from drafts?
Well, no, it's an age thing. There's
right, but if you're younger, so it's
you're not going to be in Congress if you're under 25.
Right.
So they're drafting only young guys, and typically people who can't afford to pay someone to go in their stead. That's what they used to do back in the day. If you were rich, you could pay someone to go to the draft for you. So if you got called in, they'd be like, okay, here's money. He'll do it. Yep. But I don't know if it's actually going to take off or if it's going to happen. But I do think it's interesting that they're actively trying to do it right now of all times.
Yeah.
Right.
I do think it's fair for men to question why the standard, if feminism's so great and we all want equality, why they are still expected to be in the selective service. I wouldn't want women to be drafted. I also think men and women are not the same when in combat. But I think you can't have culture saying one thing and then be like, but actually in this case, you guys have to do this thing.
This impulse that to basically get rid of men and women. It has a name, so people, and there's a lot of people that aren't familiar with it, but it has a name. It's called gender abolitionism, right? They want to abolish the concept of gender. We laugh
Not all
about
the time, apparently.
we
Just sometimes.
we chuckle about it and stuff, but I tell you what, I was telling the guys in the band that in 2015, I was like, trans people are going to be a big deal. Like, it's going to be a national conversation, and watch you see it. And they're like, you're crazy, Phil. So I'm telling you right now, if you don't believe me, Google it. Gender abolitionism. They want to get rid of the concept of gender between men and women. That is impossible. It is impossible, and it will absolutely wreak havoc in our society if we try it. We can say to trans women and trans men, we'll call you she, and we will be polite, but there are going to be places where you are not going to be allowed to be if you're a trans man, and there are going to be places where you're not going to be allowed to be.
The military doesn't allow that already.
Yeah.
In the military, it specifically says for the draft, your identity is meaningless and void. Not and also, yeah, serious. So
but that shouldn't be. I think the point of me saying that there are people that are gender abolitionists is we should have people that change that policy in the military.
Right. My point is the military is saying if you're a trans woman, you're a guy.
Well,
if you're a trans man, you're a woman. You can't be in the military. They don't care.
I thought there were trans people in the military now.
If you are, you can't be drafted.
Okay.
If you are a female, identify as a man, you cannot be drafted. If you are a man who identifies as a woman, you will be drafted. They have clarified this specifically. Yeah. Males who identify as female are males as far as the draft is concerned. They don't care. When it comes to social life inside the United States, they literally don't care about this. Military has no reason to care. But if you're male, you're going to war, and they're going to hand you the weapon, and they're going to send you out there. So here's a story. BBC. Russia's removal of border markers unacceptable, says the EU. So the escalation's happening. There's a lake, and half the lake's controlled by Russia, the other half's controlled by Estonia. And Russia went out and removed the international border barriers, or the border markers. Certainly seems like there's an escalation for conflict happening. So I hope Gen Z is listening. You know, it's going to be, they should be excited to hear that they're first in line.
And for everybody that says that we're doomers here, like, just tell me where the off-ramp is. Been saying it for a year.
You know I'm really excited for? I'm excited for you guys. Have you guys seen Edge of Tomorrow?
Yes.
No.
With Tom Cruise. It's basically action movie Groundhog Day. It is.
It is, yeah. No, just point it out.
That's the one with the crazy plane stunt.
No.
That's all Tom Cruise movies.
Edge of Tomorrow is there's an alien invasion. The humans all unite together to fight against the aliens, but they're losing everywhere. And so Tom Cruise plays a propagandist PR guy who works for who's in the military, and he's like, his story is that he did ROTC and then went and ran a marketing firm. So when it came time, he said, I'll do marketing for the military, and then one of the generals of the Allied forces wants to send him to the front lines with a camera to film their new exosuits that they can fight with to push back on the aliens.
Oh, yeah, I have seen it.
It's great. Yeah. And then he gets covered in alien blood, which sends him in a time loop. So every day he wakes up at the same time and then ends up destroying the aliens. I'm excited for Harry Sisson, because he's like sitting there smiling, shaking hands with Biden. And then it's going to happen. I mean, it won't be literally like that, but they're like, hey, look, when the war comes, you're going to have to convince everybody to go fight and die. If it comes down to it, he's going to be the kid that they're going to hand the camera to, and they're going to say, have fun in Europe.
Well, and if you think
lines are calling, buddy.
If you think Biden's such a good president, I mean, hopefully you'll be like, yes, of course, President Biden, I will go into this war. That sounds great. I mean,
he'll be crying.
No, I doubt they would want to go. The thing is, like, I think the anti-war sentiment in America is really strong. So I think there are all kinds of generations that would normally be anti-war that are suddenly having to face the reality that they are advocating for a president that is pro-war, right?
Yeah, you really do not see Biden supporters lining up, cheering on, or getting ready. I'm going to go to Ukraine.
No.
You don't see it.
No, they're happy to hang the flags, and they're happy to have the flag flown in our Congress, but they don't actually want to be the people to be on the ground. And I think that's the sort of maybe generational gap between generations that have faced hardship and have been closer to war times versus the younger generations today. Like they don't have a concept of what it's like. I think Russia removing the barriers is interesting again because this is obvious, right? There is clearly no de-escalation plan, and I think the Biden administration is making this worse for everybody. I don't think they're doing anything to to stop Russia from seeing NATO as an increasing threat. And so why wouldn't Russia increase what it's doing? Like this is all just more and more and more until, I don't know, what, Ukraine collapses? What is the plan here? And the reality is I don't think there is one. It's just ego versus,
This is an interesting story from today, but also the least relevant. World War III has already begun, claims Russian state TV. Literally don't care.
Well,
because they've said this 80 times already, so it's like, yeah, we get it.
When did World War II get classified as World War II? Like, when did people start calling it World War II?
I can't speak for World War II. It was obviously sometime after the war had already started a while, ways into it.
Right.
But this is actually a question for all wars.
Yeah.
When did people begin to refer to the war by name, and when did they realize they were in war? And of course, the example I know much better is the Civil War, and they had no idea they were in a civil war when the Civil War started. They had no idea that Bleeding Kansas was the lead up to the Civil War. When Fort Sumter happened, there was no Civil War. We call that the start of the Civil War. When it happened, they said, no, it's not. Are you crazy? You'd go to somebody and you'd say, do you think we're in a Civil War? And they go, what? No. Then at the first Battle of Bull Run in Manassas, they went on the hilltops and they picnicked and they watched as troops lined up and there's like, there's no Civil War. And then it was a massacre. And then they're like, oh, wow, maybe we're in a Civil War.
Maybe this is pretty
They
bad.
probably just called it the war, though.
At first, it was called rebellion. It was rebellion in the South, depending on who you talk to. Then it was called the war between states for a little while. And then about a year or two into it, they started referring to it as the U.S. Civil War. Yeah. Abraham Lincoln was elected during the Civil War. He was reelected during war. They just excluded southern states from the election. So Zelensky, in Ukraine, he canceled elections. Can't have an election, he said. We're at war. Yeah, that's not a real country.
Convenient for him. Interesting.
Not a real country. Puppet state controlled by U.S. military powers. So, Russia keeps saying World War III has already begun. I get it, dude. I agree. But we're going to need a shot heard around the world moment that the average person wakes up to. I'll put it this way. And it's the same thing for any conflict. U.S. Civil War, maybe. I don't know. If everything right now were to stop, like if Joe Biden came out and said, I'm just too old. Imagine he does a press conference like, I'm too old for this. I got these guys screaming in my ear from the intelligence agencies about how Trump's got to be stopped. No, I'm done. I'm resigning. Donald Trump should win the presidency. It's enough fighting in this country. We're going to come together. And everyone's like, wow, what's going on? Then Trump wins. And Trump says, we're going to mend this nation. We're going to bring everyone together. And I'd bet, wow, we're watching de-escalation. That's never going to happen. That's an absurdity. Same thing is true for what's going on in Europe right now. There's no point at which Russia comes out and says, guys, we're sorry. Our border nations will be controlled by NATO. We're totally cool with it. We will surrender Crimea and our access to the Black Sea. We will surrender our access to the Mediterranean. And we will no longer sell energy to European nations. Never going to happen.
I also don't think Zelensky would ever want America to withdraw the monetary and military influence that they have there, right? But he's giving Biden a hard time for not coming to this peace summit in a couple weeks. Like there is a level of it has done his presidency wonders to have this conflict, to be a wartime president. It literally allowed him to stay in office.
Zelensky?
Yeah.
Well, that's like saying the janitor of a company doesn't want his employer to remove the trash cans.
Maybe, but I think it means, I think the other thing is that he is not really incentivized to de-escalate this war, right? If the U.S.
has
is
no
going to write
authority.
a blank check, right? But also, if the U.S. is going to write a blank check and you get to stay president, because isn't he term limited? He's supposed to be out, but he said,
but I'm confused because he's not a president of a country. He's a janitor.
I know, but hypothetically.
So his wants and needs are completely immaterial to what the U.S. is doing in Ukraine.
Sure.
The idea that Zelensky is like, I'm president and I hope I win again is like just, come on.
Well, he doesn't need to win again because he can just be the president until he decides elections come back.
Well, no, I
get what you're saying.
It's whatever Biden
he's not
decides.
whatever. It's what Biden says. I get that. But I'm also making the point that Zelensky is benefiting from this. Like he can comply with whatever Biden's doing. There's no benefit for him for resisting
like
Biden.
the way a janitor benefits by getting a paycheck for being paid to clean up the floors.
Sure. I mean,
Zelensky is an
any kind
employee
of henchman in a corrupt company would benefit from it.
Zelensky is the employee of the West. He is there to do the job he's instructed to do, and that's it. His elections don't matter. There's already no elections. He's just an employee as far as anyone would be concerned as to what's actually happening in that country. He has to get permission from Joe Biden to use weapons against Russia. Yeah, because he's an employee. That's it. Maybe a servant is a better word. Under the command of. Mm-hmm. There's no elections because Biden and military intelligence, as it's CIA, said there's not going to be elections. We're not going to change out which puppet we're using for control of Ukraine. So just don't do it. And there's no one in Ukraine who can resist. And no country is going to intervene on the behalf of Ukrainians. They've fled. The people that I knew from Ukraine have fled a long time ago. They don't live there anymore. And if Ukraine falls, then 20 years from now, they'll be like, oh, so you're Ukrainian? Wow. So what is it like now that there's no Ukraine anymore? There's no country called Ukraine. Remember Bohemia? I knew a guy who was Bohemian. Ain't no Bohemia anymore. Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.